Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I used to believe that intelligence meant strength, that if someone was articulate, educated, and successful, they must also be wise, and maybe even kind. That belief cost me 10 years of my life. My name is Arman, and for a long time I was married to a woman named Nadia. On paper, she was everything people admired. A high-powered lawyer, confident, polished, respected in every room she walked into. When we first met, I was drawn to that energy. She spoke like she owned the world, and I guess I admired that because I never felt like I did. Back then, I was running a modest logistics business, nothing glamorous, but stable. I worked long hours, built relationships, kept things moving. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. And in the beginning, Nadia said she loved that about me, said I was grounded, said I made her feel safe. I didn't realize at the time that what she really meant was controllable. The first few years of our marriage were peaceful, at least on the surface. We bought a house together. I paid most of the mortgage. She insisted on handling the legal paperwork, said it was easier since she understood contracts better than I did. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife. That was my first mistake. Over time, things started to shift, subtly at first. Nadia began correcting me in conversations, especially around others. If I told a story, she'd interrupt to clarify details. If I made a decision, she'd question it, never outright disagreeing, but always planting doubt. "You're sure that's the best move?" she'd say, smiling politely while others watched. At home, it got worse. She'd review my business choices like I was one of her clients, except I wasn't paying her, and I never asked for the advice. She'd point out risks, flaws, loopholes. Every conversation turned into a quiet critique. And somehow, I started believing her. I began second-guessing everything, my instincts, my judgment, even my own worth. I told myself she was just smarter, more experienced, that maybe this was what a strong partnership looked like. But deep down, I felt smaller. The real turning point came about 8 years into our marriage. I remember the day clearly because it started like any other. I came home early, thinking I'd surprise her with dinner, but when I walked in, the house was empty. Her car was gone. No message, no note. I didn't think much of it at first. Nadia was busy. Her schedule changed all the time. But when she got home that night, something felt off. She didn't greet me, didn't ask about my day. She just walked in, set her bag down, and looked at me like I was a problem she needed to solve. "We need to talk," she said. I don't know why those words always feel like a punch to the chest, but they do. She sat across from me, perfectly composed, like she was about to present a case in court. "I think it's best if we separate." Just like that. No emotion, no hesitation. I remember laughing at first, not because it was funny, but because it didn't feel real. "Separate?" I said. "Where is this coming from?" She sighed, like I was being difficult. "Arman, we've grown apart. You're not the man I married anymore." That line stuck with me, not because it was true, but because of how easily she said it. I tried to reason with her, asked if we could work on things, counseling, time apart, anything, but she had already made her mind. Looking back now, I realized something important. That conversation wasn't a discussion, it was a declaration. The divorce process was brutal. Not emotionally. I mean, yes, it hurt, but what shocked me more was how strategic she became, or maybe she always was. Turns out, the house we bought together, it was primarily under her name. The contracts she handled all those years, structured in ways that favored her. My business, She found legal grounds to claim partial ownership, arguing that marital support contributed to its growth. Every move I made, she countered with something sharper. It felt like I wasn't divorcing my wife, I was being dismantled by a professional. Friends told me to fight harder, to get a better lawyer, but I was exhausted, drained, and if I'm being honest, I still couldn't fully accept that the woman I loved was doing this to me so deliberately. In the end, I walked away with far less than I had built: a small apartment, a fraction of my business, and a silence that followed me everywhere. For months after the divorce, I barely recognized myself. I'd wake up, go through the motions, come home and sit in the quiet. No arguments, no tension, but also no warmth. Just emptiness. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. It was raining heavily that afternoon. I had just returned from a long day and noticed water leaking from the ceiling in my apartment. I called the building manager, who said they'd send someone over. An hour later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, I saw her. She was wearing a simple uniform, slightly damp from the rain, holding a small toolbox. Her hair was tied back, and there was a kind of quiet confidence in her eyes, not the loud, commanding kind I was used to, but something steadier. She said, "I'm here to check the leak," softly. Her name was Syra. At first, it was just a brief interaction. She inspected the ceiling, explained the issue, and fixed what she could. But what stayed with me wasn't what she did, it was how she spoke. No condescension, no hidden judgment, just clarity and respect. When she finished, she noticed the scattered papers on my table, business documents I had been struggling to reorganize. "You work a lot," she said, not as a question, but as an observation. I nodded, trying to rebuild. She smiled, but it wasn't pity, it was understanding. "Then don't rush it. Things built slowly last longer." It was such a simple sentence, but for some reason it stayed with me. After she left, I found myself thinking about it for days. Things built slowly last longer. No one had spoken to me like that in years, not as someone to correct, not as someone to compete with, but as someone worth speaking to gently. I didn't know it then, but that moment would change everything. Because the woman who fixed my ceiling would eventually rebuild parts of me that I didn't even realize were broken. And somehow, she would also become the reason my ex-wife would finally learn a lesson she could never argue her way out of. I didn't see Syra again for a few weeks after that day, but somehow her presence lingered in my mind longer than it should have. It wasn't anything dramatic. She hadn't said anything profound or life-changing in the way people usually describe those moments, but there was something about her tone, the way she looked at me without trying to measure me, that stayed. At that point in my life, I had grown so used to being evaluated that I forgot what it felt like to simply be seen. The next time I saw her, it was by accident. I had just come back from a frustrating meeting. One of my clients had backed out last minute, and I could feel that familiar weight creeping back into my chest, the same one I used to carry when Nadia would dismantle my decisions piece by piece. As I walked into the building lobby, I saw Syra kneeling near the reception desk, cleaning up a spill. She looked up briefly, recognized me, and gave a small nod. "Leak holding up?" she asked. I managed a tired smile. "Yeah, thanks to you." She stood up, wiping her hands with a cloth. "Good. Would have been worse if it spread." I hesitated for a moment, then said, "You always this calm about things?" She tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. "I just fix what I can. No point panicking about the rest." Again, simple words, but they landed differently. I found myself lingering there longer than necessary. We talked for a few minutes, nothing deep, just small things. But even in those few minutes, I noticed something I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't trying to impress her. I wasn't choosing my words carefully or bracing myself for correction. I was just talking. And for the first time in years, that felt enough. Over the next couple of months, our paths crossed more often, sometimes in the lobby, sometimes in the hallway, once or twice when she was working in other apartments on my floor. Each interaction was brief, but consistent. And slowly, something shifted. I started looking forward to those moments, not in a dramatic, romantic way at first, just quietly, like noticing sunlight in a room you thought would always stay dim. One evening, I came home earlier than usual and found her sitting on the staircase outside, taking a short break. She looked tired, more than I had seen before. "Long day?" I asked. She gave a small laugh. "They're all long days." I sat a few steps above her, keeping a respectful distance. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something that caught me off guard. "You're different now." I frowned slightly. "Different how?" She glanced at me, then looked away again. "First time I came to your apartment, you looked like you were holding your breath, like you were waiting for something to go wrong." That hit harder than I expected. "And now?" I asked quietly. She shrugged. "Now you look like you're learning how to breathe again." I didn't know what to say to that, because she was right. Somewhere between losing everything and starting over, I had forgotten how to exist without fear of being corrected, judged, or quietly diminished. And somehow, without even trying, Syra had noticed that. Over time, our conversations grew longer. I learned that she worked multiple jobs, cleaning apartments during the day, helping her aunt in the evenings, and occasionally taking on extra work whenever she could. Her life wasn't easy. There was no safety net, no shortcuts. But she carried herself with a kind of quiet dignity that I had never seen before. No complaints, no need to prove anything, just steady. One night, after weeks of talking and passing, I asked her if she wanted to have tea. It wasn't a grand invitation, just something simple. She hesitated at first, clearly unsure. "I don't usually," she started. "It's just tea," I said gently. "No expectations." She studied my face for a moment, as if trying to read something beneath the surface. Then she nodded. "Okay." That evening was nothing like what I had experienced in my previous marriage. There were no debates, no subtle competitions disguised as conversations, no need to constantly prove a point. We talked about ordinary things, her childhood, my business, the small challenges of daily life, and somehow those ordinary things felt more meaningful than any of the high-level discussions I used to have with Nadia. At one point, I apologized. "I'm not exactly in the best place right now, still figuring things out." Syra looked at me confused. "Why are you apologizing for that?" I hesitated. "Because I don't have much to offer." She shook her head immediately. "You're offering time. That's already more than most people do." That sentence stayed with me long after she left that night. You're offering time. For years, I had been made to feel like I wasn't enough unless I brought something impressive to the table: money, status, influence. But here was someone who valued something as simple as presence. It changed the way I saw myself. As months passed, our connection deepened, slowly, naturally, without pressure. And one day, without realizing how it happened, I found myself smiling more, sleeping better, thinking clearer. I was rebuilding my business, yes, but more importantly, I was rebuilding myself. Eventually, I asked her to marry me, not because I needed someone, but because for the first time in my life, I wanted to share my life with someone who saw me as an equal. She didn't say yes immediately. In fact, she looked almost worried. "Armand, are you sure?" she asked softly. "Your world is very different from mine." I smiled. "That's exactly why I'm sure." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." Our wedding was small, simple. No grand displays, no long guest lists filled with people trying to measure success through appearances. Just a few close friends, quiet laughter, and a sense of peace I had never felt before. For a while, life felt steady, better than steady. It felt real. But the past has a way of circling back when you least expect it. And in my case, it didn't just come back quietly. It came back wearing the same sharp smile, carrying the same calculated confidence. And this time, it had a plan. Because Nadia hadn't forgotten me, not even for a second. And what she did next wasn't just about revisiting the past. It was about trying to prove that she still had control. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't the same man she left behind, and neither
The first
was the
time I saw
woman
Nadia
standing
again
beside
after
me.
my remarriage, it didn't feel real. It was one of those quiet afternoons where everything seems normal on the surface. I had just stepped out of my office building after wrapping up a meeting that had actually gone well for once. Business was slowly stabilizing again, not the way it used to be, but enough to feel like I was standing on solid ground. I remember checking my phone as I walked toward my car, thinking about picking up something nice for Syra on the way home. She had mentioned wanting to try a new tea blend, and I had made a mental note of it. That's when I heard her voice. "Armand." It stopped me instantly. Some voices, they don't fade with time. They just get quieter in your memory, waiting for the right moment to come back. I turned around slowly. And there she was, Nadia. She looked exactly the same, perfectly put together, dressed in a way that made it clear she still lived in a world where appearances mattered. Her posture was confident, her expression controlled, but her eyes were studying me, evaluating, the same way she always used to. For a brief second, I felt that old tightening in my chest, that instinct to brace myself, to prepare for whatever angle she was about to take. But then something surprising happened. It passed. Not completely, not instantly, but enough for me to notice the difference. I wasn't the same man anymore. "Nadia," I said, keeping my voice calm. She took a step closer, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. "You look different," she said. There it was again, that word, different. I almost smiled. "People change," I replied simply. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to figure out what exactly had changed. "I've heard things," she continued, "about your business, about your situation." I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. News travels fast when people are looking for it. "And?" I asked. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "I just didn't expect you to recover this quickly." There was something beneath that sentence. Not quite a compliment, not quite an insult, just observation. "I didn't expect it either," I said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then her gaze shifted slightly. "I also heard you got married again." There it was, the real reason she was here. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something in her mind. "To a maid," she added. The word hung in the air. Not loud, not aggressive, but heavy. I watched her carefully, waiting to see if there was any hint of hesitation, any sign that she realized how that sounded. There wasn't. I took a slow breath. Her name is Syra, and yes. Nadia let out a small, almost amused exhale. I see. That tone, I remembered it well. It was the same tone she used when she thought she understood something better than everyone else. I have to admit, she continued, I didn't expect you'd go in that direction. I raised my eyebrows slightly. What direction is that? She smiled faintly. You always cared about stability, growth, position. And now, she paused, glancing at me briefly before finishing the sentence, you've chosen someone who doesn't really fit into that world. There it was, not just judgment, categorization, the same way she used to break everything down into boxes, value, usefulness, status. I felt something stir inside me, not anger exactly, but clarity. You're right, I said. That seemed to catch her off guard. I did choose differently. She studied me more closely now. And you're okay with that? She asked. I held her gaze. I've never been more okay. For the first time since the conversation started, something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but I saw it. A crack. She didn't like that answer. I hope you know what you're doing, she said, her voice carrying that familiar edge of quiet superiority. People like her, she added, they don't always understand the kind of life you've lived. I could have argued. I could have pointed out everything she didn't understand about the kind of life I lived with her, but instead I said something simpler. She understands more than you think. Nadia's smile tightened slightly. Well, she said, adjusting her bag, I suppose time will tell. There was a pause, a moment where it felt like she was deciding whether to say more. Then she did. I'd like to meet her. That I didn't expect. I frowned slightly. Why? She shrugged lightly. Curiosity, she said. After all, she's part of your life now, and we do have a history. There was something off about it, not the request itself, but the way she said it. Too casual, too controlled, like she had already thought this through. I'll think about it, I replied. She nodded as if that answer was acceptable. Do that. Then, just like that, she stepped back. It was good seeing you, Arman. I didn't respond immediately. I just watched her for a moment. Then I said, Take care, Nadia, and she walked away. But something about that encounter didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the comment about Syra. It was the intention behind everything. Nadia never did anything without a reason, and I knew her well enough to understand one thing. She hadn't come back into my life out of curiosity. She had come back because something about my life didn't make sense to her. And when things didn't make sense to Nadia, she didn't ignore them. She investigated them. That evening, when I got home, Syra was in the kitchen preparing tea. The soft clinking of cups, the gentle rhythm of her movements, it all felt grounding in a way I couldn't explain. You're late, she said softly without turning around. I ran into someone, I replied. She glanced over her shoulder. Everything okay? I hesitated for a moment. Then I said it. I saw Nadia. She didn't react immediately. She just turned off the stove, poured the tea, and placed 2 cups on the table before sitting down across from me. Okay, she said calmly. That was it. No questions, no assumptions, just space. I admitted. Then I added, she wants to meet you. That made her pause, not out of fear, not out of insecurity, just thought. Why? She asked. I'm not sure, I admitted, but knowing her, it's not random. Syra nodded slowly. Then she looked at me. Do you want me to meet her? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about it that way. What did I want? I looked at her, really looked at her, at the calm in her eyes, the steadiness in her presence, and I realized something. I wasn't worried about how she would handle Nadia. I was worried about why Nadia wanted this in the first place. I don't know yet, I admitted honestly. Syra nodded. Then take your time. No pressure, no urgency, just trust. But deep down, something told me this wasn't going to be simple, because Nadia had never been simple. And if she wanted to meet Syra, it wasn't just a meeting. It was the beginning of something calculated, something deliberate. And this time, I have a feeling she was about to underestimate the one person she shouldn't. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had already been set in motion. It wasn't paranoia, it was familiarity. When you spend years with someone like Nadia, you learn to recognize patterns, the pauses before a move, the way she introduced an idea casually, only to build on it later with precision. She never rushed anything. She let things unfold exactly the way she wanted them to. And that's what unsettled me the most. She hadn't insisted on meeting Syra. She had simply suggested it, which meant she was confident it would happen. The question was, how? At home, things remained calm. Syra didn't bring it up again, and I didn't force the conversation. But I noticed something about her. Not anxiety, not curiosity, just awareness. Like she had quietly filed the information away and was waiting for the right moment to understand it fully. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, she spoke. "You're thinking about her a lot," she said gently. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. I sighed. I'm trying not to. But you are. I nodded. She stirred her tea slowly, then looked at me. Is it because you're worried about what she'll do or what she'll say? I paused. I think both. Syra nodded as if that made perfect sense. Then she said something I didn't expect. You don't have to protect me from her. I frowned slightly. I'm not trying to protect you. She gave me a small, knowing smile. You are, she said, but you don't need to. There was no pride in her voice, no challenge, just quiet certainty. She doesn't know me, Syra continued, and I don't know her, so whatever she thinks doesn't belong to me. I leaned back slightly, studying her. You really believe that? She shrugged lightly. I've spent my whole life around people who think they understand me just by looking at me. If I carried all of their opinions, I wouldn't be able to move. That stopped me because she was right. And more importantly, she wasn't saying it to convince me. She was just stating a truth she had already accepted. That night, I slept better than I had in days. But the calm didn't last long. A week later, I received an email. It was from a corporate client, one I had been working hard to secure for months. The deal wasn't finalized yet, but we were close enough that I had started planning around it. The email was brief. They were withdrawing. No explanation, no room for discussion. Just gone. At first, I thought it was just bad luck. Deals fall through. It happens. But then another one followed, and another. Within 3 weeks, 3 separate clients had either backed out or delayed indefinitely. That's when I knew. This wasn't random. Something or someone was interfering. I tried to stay rational, looked for internal issues, reviewed my proposals, my pricing, my communication. Nothing stood out. Everything was solid, which meant the problem wasn't coming from within, it was coming from without. And there was only one person who had both the motive and the ability to do something like this. Nadia. I didn't want to believe it at first, but the pattern was too clear. She had always known how to use systems to her advantage, how to influence outcomes without leaving obvious traces. If she wanted to create pressure in my life, she wouldn't do it directly. She'd do it like this, quietly, strategically. I didn't tell Syra right away, not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't want to bring that weight into our home without being certain. But she noticed anyway. She always did. "You're carrying something," she said one evening as we sat together in silence. I looked at her, then sighed. "Some clients backed out, more than usual." She nodded slowly. "Do you know why?" I hesitated. "I have a suspicion." She didn't ask who, she just waited. "It might be Nadia," I said finally. There was a brief pause. Not shock, not anger, just processing. "Okay," she said. That was it. No dramatic reaction, no immediate conclusions, just okay. "You don't seem surprised," I said. She looked at me. "You told me she's strategic, so I'm listening to what you already know." I let out a quiet breath. "I don't have proof," I added. "You don't need proof to be careful," she said. That line stayed with me. You don't need proof to be careful. It wasn't about jumping to conclusions. It was about awareness. For the next few days, I paid closer attention, reached out to contacts I trusted, asked indirect questions, tried to understand if there was something happening behind the scenes. And slowly, pieces started to come together. One of the companies that pulled out had recently hired a legal consultant. Guess who? Nadia. Another client mentioned concerns about contractual risks that hadn't been there before, language that sounded familiar, too familiar. It was subtle, but it was there. She wasn't attacking me directly. She was influencing the environment around me, creating doubt, shifting perception, the same way she used to with me. Only now, she was doing it on a larger scale. That night, I told Syra everything, not just what was happening now, but what I was starting to understand about how Nadia operated. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Syra spoke. "She wants you to react," she said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "She's creating pressure," Syra explained, "so that you either confront her or make a mistake." I considered that. It made sense. "So what do I do?" I asked. Syra looked at me calmly. "You don't play her game." I exhaled softly. "And if she keeps pushing?" Her eyes met mine. "Then you change the rules." There it was again, that quiet clarity, no aggression, no panic, just direction. "And how do I do that?" I asked. Syra didn't answer immediately. She reached for her tea, took a small sip, then set the cup down. Then she looked at me. "We meet her." The words landed softly but firmly. I blinked. "You're sure?" She nodded. "If she wants to understand our life, let her see it." I studied her carefully. "You know she's going to judge you." Syra gave a faint smile. "She already has." I couldn't argue with that. "And you're okay with it?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly. "I'm not meeting her for her," she said. "I'm meeting her for you." That I didn't expect. "For me?" I repeated. She nodded. "You spent years being seen the wrong way. Maybe it's time someone sees the truth, even if they don't like it." I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear, not doubt, something steadier, resolute. Because for the first time since Nadia had reappeared, I wasn't thinking about defending myself. I was thinking about standing in something real. And somehow, I knew this meeting wouldn't just be a conversation. It would be a turning point, not just for me, but for all three of us. And if Nadia thought she was walking into something she could control, she was about to be very wrong. We didn't rush into it. That was the first difference between how I used to handle things and how I was learning to handle them now. With Nadia, everything had always felt like a reaction, a response to pressure, a need to keep up, to match her pace, to defend my ground before she took more of it. But with Syra, things moved differently, deliberately. So instead of calling Nadia immediately, we waited a few days. Not out of hesitation, but out of intention. I used that time to observe, to stabilize what I could in my business, and to prepare, not for an argument, but for clarity. When I finally reached out, Nadia answered on the second ring. "Armand," she said, her voice smooth, as if she had been expecting the call. "I've thought about it. We can meet." There was a brief pause. "Good," she replied. "I was hoping you'd say that." Of course she was. We agreed on a place, a quiet, upscale cafe she used to frequent, the kind of place where everything was carefully arranged, where conversations were soft but meaningful, where appearances mattered just enough to influence perception. I almost suggested somewhere else, but then I stopped myself. No, let her choose the setting. It wouldn't change what needed to happen. The day of the meeting, I noticed something about myself. I wasn't nervous, not the way I used to be. There was no tightness in my chest, no rehearsed arguments running through my mind, just a quiet awareness of what this moment represented. When we arrived, Nadia was already there. Of course she was. She sat near the window, dressed impeccably, her posture straight, her expression composed. To anyone else, she would have looked like someone completely in control of her world. But I saw more than that now. I saw the calculation behind it. As we approached, she stood up, her eyes immediately landing on Syra, and for a brief moment, something flickered. It was quick, almost invisible, but I caught it. Expectation meeting reality. "Armand," she said, then turned to Syra. "And you must be—" "Syra," she replied, calmly. Her voice was steady, not too soft, not too strong, just present. They shook hands. Nadia's grip was firm, measured. Syra's was simple, unforced. We sat down. For a moment, there was silence. Not awkward, just evaluative. Nadia was studying her. I could see it in the way her eyes moved, taking in Syra's appearance, her posture, the way she held herself. It was subtle, but it was there. The same way she used to assess people in meetings, categorizing, measuring, deciding. "So," Nadia began, folding her hands neatly on the table, "I've heard a little about you." Syra nodded. "I imagine you have." No defensiveness, no curiosity, just acknowledgement. Nadia smiled faintly. "And what have you heard about me?" she asked. Syra met her gaze. "That you're important to his past," she said simply. That answer shifted something. It wasn't dismissive. It wasn't engaging. It was contained. Nadia leaned back slightly, clearly recalibrating. "I suppose that's one way to put it." The waiter arrived, giving us a momentary pause as we ordered. When he left, the air felt different, more focused. "So, Syra, what do you do?" There it was, the question, simple on the surface, but loaded. "I work," Syra said. Nadia's smile tightened slightly. "I assumed that," she replied. "But in what capacity?" Syra didn't rush her answer. "I work for apartments, and I help my aunt with her business." Nadia nodded slowly. "I see." That tone again, polite but distant. "And how did you and Armand meet?" she asked. "He had a leak in his ceiling," Syra replied. For the first time, I saw something close to amusement in Nadia's eyes. "How practical," she said. Syra didn't react. She simply nodded. Yes. There was a pause. Nadia glanced at me briefly, then back at Syra. And you decided to marry him. It wasn't a question, it was a statement wrapped in curiosity. Syra tilted her head slightly. We decided, she corrected gently. Another small shift. Nadia noticed it. I could tell. And what is it that you see in him? Nadia asked, her voice smooth but deliberate. I felt the weight of that question, because I knew what she was really asking. What could someone like you possibly see in someone like him? Syra didn't answer immediately. She looked at me for a brief second, then back at Nadia. He listens, she said. That was it. Just 2 words, but they landed harder than anything that had been said so far. Nadia blinked once, not expecting that. He listens, she repeated. Syra nodded. Yes. There was a silence after that, a longer one, because there wasn't much to challenge in that answer. It wasn't about status, it wasn't about success, it wasn't something you could argue against or dissect. It was human. Nadia shifted slightly in her seat. And that's enough? She asked. Syra's expression remained calm. It's a lot more than people think, she replied. I saw it then, the first real crack. Not in Nadia's composure, but in her certainty. Because this wasn't a conversation she could control the way she was used to. There were no legal arguments to dismantle, no logical loopholes to exploit. Just presence. And she didn't quite know what to do with that. So tell me, Nadia said, after a moment, her tone sharpening just slightly, do you understand the kind of world Armand comes from? The responsibilities, the expectations? Syra met my gaze steadily. I understand the kind of person he is. That's enough for me. Nadia leaned forward slightly. But is it enough for him? She asked. That question was aimed at me. Finally, I felt Syra's presence beside me, not physically, but steadily, grounding. I looked at Nadia. For the first time in my life, it is. The words came out without hesitation, without doubt, and I meant them. Nadia held my gaze for a moment, then she leaned back again, studying, reassessing, because this wasn't going the way she expected, not even close. But I knew something else. She wasn't done. Not yet. This meeting wasn't her move, it was just her opening. And whatever came next would be where she tried to regain control. The only difference now was that she wasn't dealing with the same man anymore. And more importantly, she wasn't dealing with someone she could easily break. For a moment after that exchange, the table fell into a quiet that felt heavier than anything that had been said out loud. Nadia picked up her cup, took a slow sip of her coffee, and set it back down with precise control. It was a familiar gesture, one she used when she needed a second to recalibrate without showing it. I had seen it 100 times before, but this time I wasn't reacting to it. I was observing it. So, she said finally, her voice smooth again, though not quite as effortless as before, you've found peace. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Yes. She tilted her head slightly, steadying me again, but now there was something different in her gaze, less certainty, more searching. And your business? She asked. I heard it's been unstable. There it was, the shift. We had moved from personal to strategic. It's recovering, I replied. She gave a small, almost sympathetic smile. I'm sure it is, though in this market recovery can be unpredictable. Her eyes flicked towards Syra for just a second before returning to me, especially without the right kind of support. I didn't miss that, and neither did Syra. But Syra didn't interrupt. She didn't defend. She just waited. And somehow that made Nadia's words feel heavier. I've managed before. I'll manage again. Nadia nodded slowly, as if acknowledging the statement but not fully agreeing with it. I suppose resilience is something you've always had, even if it needed refinement. That word again, refinement, as if I had always been something unfinished in her eyes. I could feel the old version of me, the one who used to sit across from her trying to prove something, start to stir. But then I glanced at Syra, and just like that, it faded, because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I don't think I need refinement. I think I just needed the right environment. That landed. Nadia's expression didn't change much, but her fingers tightened slightly around her cup. The right environment, she repeated. Yes. There was a pause. Then she smiled again, but this time it felt thinner. Well, I'm glad you found that. The words sounded polite, but the meaning behind them was unsettled. Because for Nadia, right had always meant controlled, structured, optimized, and what she was seeing now didn't fit into that framework. The conversation shifted after that, but not in the way I expected. Instead of pressing further, Nadia became quieter, more observant. She asked a few more questions about our daily routines, about how we spent our time, but they felt less like direct challenges and more like data gathering. She was trying to understand something, not just Syra, but us, and that made me more alert, because when Nadia tried to understand something, it meant she hadn't figured out how to use it yet. Eventually, the meeting came to a natural close, or at least what looked like one. Well, Nadia said, standing up smoothly, this has been enlightening. She looked at Syra. It was nice meeting you. Syra stood as well. You too. Simple, neutral, unshaken. Then Nadia turned to me. We should talk again. There are still things to discuss. I held her gaze. About what? She smiled faintly. Life has a way of bringing unfinished matters back around. I'm sure you understand that. I did, more than she realized. I'll think about it, I replied. She nodded, as if that answer was acceptable. Then she left, just like that. No dramatic exit, no final remark, but the moment she walked away, I felt it, the shift. Something had changed, not just in the room, but in her. Syra and I walked out of the cafe together in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because neither of us felt the need to fill the space immediately. When we reached the car, I turned to her. You okay? I asked. She nodded. Yes. I studied her for a moment. You handled that better than I expected. She raised her eyebrows slightly. What were you expecting? I exhaled softly. I don't know. Something more reactive. Cyrus smiled faintly. She wanted that. I frowned. You think so? Yes, she replied. She was waiting for me to defend myself, or to challenge her, or to prove something. I considered that. It made sense. But you didn't, I said. She shook her head. There was nothing to prove. That simplicity, it still amazed me. And what do you think she was trying to do? I asked her. Syra leaned lightly against the car door, thinking for a moment. She was trying to find where she fits. I blinked. What do you mean? In your life, in your decisions, in your future. She wanted to see if she still has influence. That hit deeper than I expected, because it was true. Every question Nadia asked, every comment she made, it wasn't just about judgment, it was about relevance. And what did she find? I asked her quietly. Syra looked at me. You'd have to ask her that. Then she opened the car door and got in. But something about her answer stayed with me, because I had a feeling Nadia already knew. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the entire meeting in my mind, every word, every pause, every look. And one thing became clear. Nadia hadn't won anything, but she hadn't lost either. Not yet. Because she was still trying to figure out her next move. And knowing her, she wouldn't stop until she did. But this time, she wasn't walking into a situation she fully understood, and that uncertainty was something she had never handled well. The next move she made wouldn't be careful, it would be calculated, but flawed, because for the first time, she was dealing with something she couldn't easily break down, and when that happened, people like her didn't step back, they pushed harder, which meant whatever came next wouldn't be subtle, it would be direct and possibly destructive. The only question was, who would it affect the most?
For a few days after the meeting, everything felt quiet. Not peaceful, just paused. Like the air before a storm you can't see yet, but you know it's coming. Nadia didn't call, didn't message, didn't try to follow up. And that, more than anything, confirmed what I already suspected. She was thinking, watching, planning. At work, I focused on stabilizing what I could. I reached out to older clients, strengthened the relationships that hadn't been affected, and avoided making any sudden decisions. If Nadia was trying to create pressure, the worst thing I could do was respond impulsively. At home, Syra carried on the same way she always did. Steady, unaffected on the surface. But I noticed something subtle. She was paying closer attention, not to Nadia directly, but to me, to how I reacted, to how I carried the situation. One evening, as we sat together after dinner, she spoke. "She's not done," Syra said. I looked up. No, she's not. There was no fear in her voice, just clarity. "What do you think she'll do?" I asked. Syra didn't answer immediately. She leaned back slightly, her eyes thoughtful. "She tried to understand us," she said. "Now she'll try to test us." I frowned. "Test how?" Syra looked at me. "She'll go after what she thinks is weakest." That word lingered, weakest. I didn't like it, but I understood it. "And what do you think she sees as weak?" I asked. Syra held my gaze for a moment. "Me," she said. The answer came without hesitation. I shook my head. "No." She gave a small, almost amused smile. "In her world," she said gently, "I don't have status. I don't have influence. I don't have leverage." I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped, because she wasn't wrong. From Nadia's perspective, Syra was the easiest variable to manipulate, the simplest point of pressure. "And that's exactly why she'll target you," I said quietly. Syra nodded. "Yes." There was a pause. Then she added, "But that doesn't mean she'll succeed." I studied her carefully. "You're not worried?" She tilted her head slightly. "I'm aware," she said. "That's different." That distinction, it mattered. Awareness without fear, it was something I was still learning. A few days later, the first move came. It started small, almost invisible. Syra came home one afternoon looking slightly more tired than usual, not physically, but mentally. "Everything okay?" I asked. She nodded at first, setting her bag down. "Yes, just a long day." But something in her tone didn't match her words. I waited, and after a moment, she sighed. "There was someone at the apartments today," she said. I felt my chest tighten slightly.
Someone? I asked. She nodded. A woman, well-dressed. She said she was visiting. I already knew, but I asked anyway. What did she want? Syra looked at me. She wanted to talk. Silence filled the room. And, I said carefully. Syra sat down across from me. She asked about you, she said, about our marriage, about how things are at home. My jaw tightened. What did you tell her? The truth, Syra replied simply. I exhaled slowly. And what did she say? Syra's expression remained calm. She said I should be careful. I frowned. Careful of what? Syra met my gaze. She said you have a pattern, that you struggle to maintain stability, that eventually things fall apart. That was classic Nadia. Not direct attack, subtle suggestion, planting doubt. And how did you respond? Syra's lips curved slightly. I asked her how she knew that. I blinked, and she said she had experience. Of course she did. And then, I pressed. Syra shrugged lightly. I thanked her for her concern. That caught me off guard. You thanked her? Yes. I stared at her for a moment, trying to understand. That's it? I asked. That's it. I ran a hand through my hair, letting out a quiet breath. She's trying to get inside your head, I said. Syra nodded. I know. And you're just okay with that? She looked at me steadily. She can say whatever she wants. What matters is whether I carry it with me. That answer, it settled something inside me. Because once again, she wasn't reacting. She wasn't resisting. She was simply choosing what to accept and what to leave behind. What do you think her next move will be? I asked. Syra thought for a moment. She'll try again, but differently. How? This time, Syra didn't answer immediately. Her eyes shifted slightly, as if considering something deeper. Then she said, she'll stop talking to me. I frowned. Why? Because I didn't react the way she expected, so now she'll try to create a situation where I don't get a choice. A chill ran through me. What kind of situation? Syra looked at me. One that forces you to react. That changed everything, because if Nadia shifted her focus back to me, she wouldn't be subtle. She'd go straight for impact, and she knew exactly where to hit. My business, my stability, my sense of control, the very thing she had already started to shake. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because I was thinking, really thinking. For the first time since Nadia had reappeared, I wasn't just reacting to her moves, I was anticipating them. And more importantly, I was starting to see the pattern clearly. She created pressure, then waited for a reaction, then used that reaction to justify her next move. It was a cycle, one I'd been trapped in for years without realizing it. But now I saw it. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. The next morning, I made a decision. Not out of panic, not out of anger, but out of understanding. If Nadia wanted to play this game, then I wasn't going to defend against it. I was going to end it. Not by confronting her directly, not by reacting emotionally, but by doing something she wouldn't expect, something she couldn't easily control. When I told Nadia when I was thinking later that day, she listened quietly. Then she asked one simple question. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "Yes." She studied me for a moment. Then she smiled. "Okay," she said. No hesitation, no doubt, just trust. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just about teaching Nadia a lesson anymore. It was about proving to myself that I was no longer the man she thought I was. And whatever came next would make that clear in a way she wouldn't be able to ignore.
The decision I made the next morning wasn't impulsive. It was something that had been building quietly since the moment Nadia walked back into my life, and even before that, if I'm being honest. For years, I had lived reactively, adjusting, defending, compensating. Even after the divorce, I carried that mindset into everything I did. Every decision was shaped by what could go wrong, what someone else might say, what I might lose. But now, I saw the pattern clearly. And more importantly, I saw how Nadia relied on it. She didn't need to overpower people. She just needed them to react. Because when she reacted, she had control. So I decided to do the one thing she wouldn't expect. I stepped out of the pattern completely. That afternoon, I made a series of calls, not to confront anyone, not to chase lost clients, but to restructure things from the ground up. I reached out to smaller partners, independent operators, people who weren't tied into the same networks Nadia could influence. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't fast, but it was solid. Then I did something else, something I should have done a long time ago. I simplified my business. Cut unnecessary dependencies, reduced exposure, focused on what I could fully control. It meant slower growth, but it also meant something far more valuable: stability. That evening, when I explained everything to Syra, she listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. "You're changing the pace," she said. I nodded. "Yes." She smiled slightly. "She won't like that." I almost laughed. "No, she won't." Because for someone like Nadia, control wasn't just about outcomes, it was about rhythm. She set the tempo, and everyone else followed. But now, I wasn't following anymore, and that meant she had to adjust, which meant she had to react. The shift didn't take long to reach her. Within a week, I noticed something different. The pressure on my business eased. Not completely, but enough to notice. One of the clients who had pulled out suddenly reached back out. Another clarified that their concerns had been misunderstood. It was subtle, but clear. Nadia had paused, and that told me everything I needed to know. She was reassessing, because whatever she had expected to happen hadn't. I didn't confront her. I didn't acknowledge it. I just kept moving, steady, unpredictable in the one way she couldn't manage. I wasn't reacting. A few days later, her next move came, but this time it was direct. I received a message from her late in the evening. "Armin, we need to talk, tomorrow." No greeting, no context, just intention. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I showed it to Syra. She read it once, then handed the phone back to me. "She's losing control," Syra said calmly. I exhaled slowly. "Yes." "Are you going to meet her?" she asked. I thought about it, then nodded. "Yes, but this time it's different." Syra studied me carefully. "How?" I met her gaze. "This time, I'm not walking in to defend anything." She nodded. "Good." The next day, I met Nadia at her office. Not a cafe, not a neutral space. Her office, her territory. But something felt different the moment I walked in. It wasn't the environment. It was me. I wasn't intimidated. I wasn't preparing for anything. I was just present.
Her assistant led me in, and Nadia was already seated behind her desk, reviewing something on her tablet. She didn't look up immediately. Another familiar tactic: control the entry, set the tone. But this time, it didn't land the same way. After a few seconds, she set the tablet down and looked at me. "Sit," she said. I did. There was no small talk, no pleasantries, just tension. "You've been busy," she said. I raised my eyebrow slightly. "Have I?" Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Your business," she clarified. "You've made some adjustments." I nodded. "I have." She leaned back in her chair, steadying me. "Why?" A simple question, but loaded. I didn't rush my answer. "Because I wanted to," I said. "That's not a strategy," she said. "It is if it works," I replied. There was a pause. Then she leaned forward slightly. "You're changing the structure, reducing your exposure, limiting your growth." I nodded. "Yes." "Why would you do that?" she pressed. I held her gaze. "Because I'm not building for speed anymore. I'm building for stability." Silence. That word again, stability. But this time, it meant something different. Not control, not perfection, just something that lasts. Nadia's fingers tapped lightly against the desk. "That's not how you win," she said. I almost smiled. "I'm not trying to win." That landed harder than anything else, because it shifted the entire frame. If I wasn't trying to win, then what was I doing? For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she said something that surprised me. "She's influencing you." It wasn't a question, it was a conclusion. I shook my head. "No," I said. "She's helping me see clearly." Nadia's expression tightened slightly. "She's changing you." Yes. There was no hesitation in my voice, and that seemed to bother her more than anything else, because change meant unpredictability, and unpredictability meant loss of control. "You're making decisions based on emotion," she said. I leaned back slightly. "No," I replied. "I'm making decisions based on reality." Her eyes locked onto mine. "And what reality is that?" I paused for just a second. Then I said it. That everything I built before was shaped by fear. Silence filled the room, because that's something she couldn't argue with. Not easily. "And now?" she asked. "Now," I said, "I'm building something that doesn't depend on what anyone else thinks of it." That was the moment everything shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but fundamentally. Because for the first time since she'd walked back into my life, Nadia realized something. She couldn't control the outcome anymore. Not through pressure, not through influence, not through perception. Because I wasn't operating in the same system she understood, and that made her uncertain. She leaned back slowly, her expression more guarded now. "You think this will protect you," she said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I know it will." Another pause. Then she said something quieter, something less calculated. "You've changed." I nodded. "Yes." And this time, there was no doubt in my voice, because I finally understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't about teaching Nadia a lesson through confrontation. It was about becoming someone she no longer had power over. And that was a lesson she couldn't ignore. But it wasn't over yet, because people like Nadia don't just accept that kind of shift. They push, one last time, harder than before. And when that happens, that's when the real test begins. When I left Nadia's office that day, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had won anything. What I felt was clarity, a kind of quiet understanding that settled deeper than any argument or outcome ever could. For the first time, I wasn't walking away from her trying to make sense of what just happened. I already understood it. And more importantly, I understood myself. But clarity doesn't stop someone like Nadia. If anything, it challenges them. Because when control starts slipping, they don't step back, they push harder. And she did. The shift happened about a week later. It didn't come through business this time. It came personally. I was at home when Syra received a call. I could tell something was off the moment she answered. Her posture changed slightly, not tense, but more alert. She listened quietly, said very little, and then ended the call after less than a minute. When she looked at me, her expression hadn't changed much, but her eyes, they were focused. "That was my aunt," she said. I sat up slightly. "Is everything okay?" Syra nodded, but there was a pause before she spoke again. "She's been having some issues with her shop," she said. "Unexpected inspections, paperwork delays. Someone filed complaints." I felt it immediately. Not panic, recognition. "And this just started?" I asked. "Yes." Of course it did. Nadia had shifted the target, not Syra directly this time, but something connected to her, something that mattered. I stood up slowly, running a hand through my hair. "She's escalating," I said quietly. Syra watched me carefully. "Yes," she replied. There was no fear in her voice, just acknowledgement. "I'm sorry," I said, the words coming out heavier than I expected. "This is because of me." Syra shook her head immediately. "No," she said, "this is because of her." That distinction mattered, but it didn't erase the responsibility I felt. "We need to fix this," I said. Syra nodded. "Yes, but not the way she expects." I looked at her. "And what does she expect?" "That you confront her," Syra said, "or that you try to fight it directly." I exhaled slowly. "She's not wrong." Syra gave a faint smile. "No, she's not." There was a moment of silence. Then Syra stood up. "I'll go see my aunt tomorrow," she said. "Understand what's happening." "I'll come with you," I said immediately. She shook her head gently. "Not yet." I frowned. "Why?" "Because this isn't your situation to step into first," she explained. "If you do, it becomes exactly what she wants." I didn't like it. Every instinct I had told me to act, to step in, to protect. But I also knew Syra was right. So the next day she went alone, and I waited. It was one of the hardest things I had done in a long time, not because I didn't trust her, but because I had spent so many years believing that action meant control. And now I was learning that sometimes restraint was stronger. When she came back that evening, I could tell immediately that she had more clarity. "It's not random," she said as soon as she walked in. I nodded. "I figured." Syra set her bag down and sat across from me. "The complaints are technical," she explained. "Things most small businesses wouldn't even think about. Licensing details, minor compliance issues. The kind that only matter if someone is looking very closely. Nadia, it had her signature all over it." "She's creating pressure," I said. "Yes, but not to shut the shop down." I frowned. "Then why?" Syra held my gaze. "To see what you'll do." That made sense. Every move Nadia had made so far followed the same pattern. Apply pressure, observe reaction, adjust. "She's testing your limits," Syra continued, "your priorities, your response." I leaned back, letting that sink in. "And if I react the way she expects, she wins," Syra said simply. Silence filled the room, because the answer was clear, but the solution wasn't as obvious. "What do we do?" I asked. Syra didn't answer immediately. She thought for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything. "We solve the problem," she said. I blinked. "Of course we do." She shook her head slightly. "No," she clarified. "We solve it without involving her." I frowned. "How?" Syra's expression remained calm. "The shop has issues, small ones, but real, so we fix them properly." I stared at her for a moment. "That's it?" "That's it." I let out a slow breath. "No confrontation? No response?" She shook her head. "No." That felt almost too simple, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Nadia wanted a reaction, a confrontation, something she could engage with. But if we didn't give her that, if we simply removed the problem, Then what was left for her to control? Nothing. Over the next few days, that's exactly what we did. Quietly, efficiently, we worked with Syra's aunt to address every issue, no matter how small. Updated paperwork, adjusted processes, strengthened compliance. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, it was just thorough. And within a week, the pressure stopped. No more inspections, no more complaints, just silence. I remember the moment it fully settled in. I was sitting at the kitchen table looking over some documents when Syra walked in. "It's done," she said. I looked up. "Everything?" She nodded. "Yes." I leaned back, exhaling slowly, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. Not relief, something deeper. Understanding. Because this wasn't just about solving a problem anymore. It was about building a life that couldn't be shaken by someone else's need for control. And we were doing exactly that. But deep down, I also knew something else. This wasn't the end, because people like Nadia don't stop when they lose control. They make one final move, one that isn't about strategy anymore, but about ego. And when that happens, that's when things become truly unpredictable. The only question was, what would she risk to try and regain what she had already lost? The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was deliberate. For nearly 2 weeks after the situation with Syra's aunt's shop was resolved, there was nothing. No interference, no indirect pressure, no messages, no appearances. On the surface, it looked like Nadia had stepped back, but I knew better. She wasn't the kind of person who accepted outcomes quietly, especially not when those outcomes didn't align with her expectations. No, this silence wasn't retreat. It was recalculation. And this time, it felt different. Not strategic, personal. I could feel it in the way everything had unfolded so far. The business pressure hadn't worked. Targeting Syra directly hadn't worked. Even shifting to her family hadn't produced the reaction Nadia was looking for, which meant one thing. She had run out of controlled variables. And when that happens, people like her stop playing the long game. They act. The final move came on a Friday evening. I had just finished reviewing some documents when my phone rang, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me not to. "Hello?" I answered. There was a brief pause, then her voice. "Armand?" No greeting, no pretense, just her. "Nadia," I said calmly. "I need to see you," she said. There was something different in her tone, less polished, less controlled, more direct. "Why?" I asked. Another pause. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "Because I'm done playing this version of the game." That caught my attention. I leaned back slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, her voice tightening just a fraction, "that whatever this is, whatever you're trying to prove, it ends now." I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then I said, "I'm not trying to prove anything." "That's exactly the problem," she replied. And there it was. Not strategy, not calculation, emotion. Real, unfiltered emotion. "Where do you want to meet?" I asked. She gave me a location. Not her office, not a cafe. A quiet park on the edge of the city. Neutral ground. Unusual for her. "I'll be there," I said. When I ended the call, Syra was already watching me. "That was her," she said. I nodded. "She wants to meet." Syra studied my face for a moment. "This is the last move," she said quietly. I exhaled. "I think so too." She stepped closer. "Then don't go as who you used to be," she said. I looked at her. "I won't." The park was nearly empty when I arrived. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. The air felt still, almost too still. Nadia was already there, standing near a bench, her back to me. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it in. Not the setting, not even her, but the feeling. There was no tension in my chest, no anticipation, just presence. "Armand?" she said without turning around. I walked closer. "Nadia." She turned to face me, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked different. Not physically, but in a way that was harder to define, less composed, less certain. "You've been avoiding me," she said. I shook my head. "No, I've been living my life." That landed immediately. Her jaw tightened slightly. "You think this is over?" she asked. "I think it ended a while ago," I replied. She let out a short, sharp breath. "No," she said, "it didn't." Her voice carried something now. Frustration. Not the controlled kind, the real kind. "You don't just walk away from everything and pretend it doesn't matter," she continued. I looked at her steadily. "I didn't pretend," I said. "I accepted it." "That's not the same thing," she snapped. "No," I replied calmly. "It's not." There was a pause, a heavy one. Then she stepped closer. "You built that life with me," she said. "Everything you had, everything you were, that came from us." I held her gaze. "And everything I lost came from that too." Silence. Her expression shifted slightly. Not defensive, not aggressive, something else. "You're rewriting it," she said quietly. I frowned slightly. "Rewriting what?" "The past," she replied. "The story. You're making it sound like I took something from you." I let that settle for a moment. Then I said, "You did." The words weren't loud, but they were firm, and they landed. Her eyes searched mine as if looking for hesitation. There wasn't any. "I gave you structure, direction, growth. I gave you doubt, dependence, fear." That hit. I could see it. Not because she agreed, but because she recognized the truth in it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said something softer. "Is that really how you see it now?" I nodded. "Yes." There was a long silence after that, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Then she laughed. Not mockingly, not confidently, just quietly. "I didn't expect this," she admitted. "I know," I said. She looked at me again, really looked. "You're not reacting." "No." "You're not fighting." "No." "Then what are you doing?" I paused for just a second. Then I answered, "I'm done." Those two words changed everything. Because they weren't defensive, they weren't emotional, they were final. Nadia stared at me, and for the first time, she had nothing to counter with. No argument, no angle, no strategy. Just silence. Because this wasn't something she could dismantle. It wasn't something she could negotiate. It was something she had no control over. "You think this makes you stronger?" she asked after a moment. I shook my head. "No," I said. "It just makes me free." And that was the moment it ended. Not with a fight, not with a victory, but with something far more powerful. Clarity. Nadia looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded once, slowly. "I see," she said. But I knew she didn't fully understand it yet, maybe never ever. And that was okay. Because this wasn't about her understanding anymore. It was about me moving forward without her, without the patterns, without the weight. As I turned to leave, she didn't stop me, didn't call after me, didn't try to pull me back into anything. And that silence said more than anything else could have, because for the first time, she had nothing left to say.
I didn't feel relief right away after leaving the park. That surprised me. For months, maybe even years, I had imagined what ending it would feel like. I thought it would be dramatic, emotional, a surge of freedom, maybe even anger finally dissolving into peace. But what I actually felt was something quieter. Not empty, not heavy, just unfamiliar stillness. Like my mind had been running in a direction for so long that stopping didn't immediately feel like progress. It felt like imbalance. The drive home was long enough for that feeling to settle in properly. Syra was waiting when I arrived. She didn't rush toward me. She didn't ask questions immediately. She just looked at me for a moment, reading my face the way she always seemed to. "Well?" she asked softly. I closed the door behind me. "It's over," I said. She nodded once, like she had already expected that answer. "And how do you feel?" she asked. I paused. That was the question I hadn't prepared for. "I don't know yet," I admitted. Syra didn't look disappointed by that answer. If anything, she looked understanding. "That's normal," she said gently. "You just ended something that shaped a big part of your life." I walked slowly into the living room and sat down. "I kept expecting it to feel like victory," I said. "And it didn't?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, it felt like silence." Cyrus had across from me. "That's because victory implies a fight still exists," she said. "You didn't win anything, Armand." I looked at her. "You ended it," she clarified. "There's a difference." That distinction sat with me for a while, because she was right. There had been a time when everything between me and Nadia felt like a contest I had to survive. Every interaction had weight. Every decision felt like positioning. But the moment I stopped participating in that structure, it stopped being a fight at all. It became something else entirely, a chapter closing on its own. Syra leaned forward slightly. "Did she say anything else?" she asked. I thought back to the park, to Nadia's diss when she realized I wasn't reacting anymore. "No, not really. She tried to understand it, but she couldn't find a way to turn it into something she could control." Syra nodded slowly. "That's what hurts people like her the most," she said quietly. I looked at her. "Losing control?" She shook her head. "Losing relevance." That word lingered in the room longer than I expected. Relevance. Because it wasn't about hatred anymore, or even conflict. It was about being part of a system that no longer responded to her input. For the first time, I understood something deeper about Nadia. She didn't just want to win, she needed to matter. And when I stopped reacting, I stopped assigning her meaning in my life. That realization didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closure. Days turned into weeks after that. Life didn't suddenly become different. It just normalized in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. No emotional spikes, no anticipation of conflict, no analyzing every message or silence. Just structure, routine, and space. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen long after Syra had gone to bed. The house was quiet. Not the tense kind of quiet I used to feel when I was waiting for something to happen. This was different, intentional.
I looked around and realized something simple. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for anything. And that realization brought something unexpected to the surface. Not sadness, not regret, reflection. Because as much as I had focused on what Nadia took from me, I also had to acknowledge what I allowed to be taken. My boundaries, my clarity, my sense of self. And now that I had those things back, I could finally see how far I had drifted without realizing it. Syra came down later, wrapped in a shawl, and sat beside me quietly. "You're thinking too much again," she said softly. I gave a faint smile. "Probably." She looked at me for a moment. "You know, not everything needs to be understood all at once," she said. I nodded. "I know. But I wasn't just thinking about the past anymore. I was thinking about the future." "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Syra leaned back slightly. "That depends," she said. "On what?" She turned her head toward me. "On whether you still feel like you're carrying her into it." That question hit deeper than I expected, because it wasn't about Nadia anymore. It was about residue, the emotional afterimage people leave behind when they've shaped your life too intensely. I took a slow breath. "I don't want to," I said honestly. Syra nodded. "Then don't," she replied. Simple, but not easy. The next morning, I went for a walk alone. The city felt different now, not because it had changed, but because I had. The streets were the same, the noise was the same, the rhythm of life continued exactly as it always had, but I wasn't scanning it for conflict anymore. I wasn't anticipating confrontation, and I wasn't looking for answers in places that couldn't give them. At one point, I stopped near a small tea stall. The man working there didn't recognize me, or maybe he did and simply didn't care. Either way, he served tea with the same casual efficiency he gave everyone else. I sat there for a while watching people pass by. Strangers, living entirely inside their own stories. And for the first time, I didn't feel like mine was still entangled with someone else's. That's when I understood something important. Closure isn't a moment, it's a practice. A repeated decision to stop reopening what has already ended. And that decision was mine now. Not Nadia's, not the past's, mine. When I returned home, Syra was in the garden, tending to plants she had started growing. She looked up when she saw me. "You're late again," she said lightly. I smiled. I stopped for tea. She nodded approvingly. "That's good." I stood there for a moment watching her. "You were right," I said. She didn't ask what I meant. She already knew. Because people who understand healing don't need explanations for it. They recognize it in silence. Syra went back to her plants, and I stood there a little longer than I needed to. Not because I was searching for meaning anymore, but because I finally understood I didn't have to. And somewhere in that quiet understanding, the story that once defined my life finally let go of me too.